Well, Thanksgiving looks a little different this year, huh? It's obviously, because of the COVID pandemic, it looks very, very different. And even weather-wise, it's been pretty warm, so it doesn't feel like fall. I mean, this morning it does. But it looks a lot different. I remember one of my first memories, or a good memory that I have of Canadian Thanksgiving was actually my second Thanksgiving here in Canada. It's probably back in 2012, and a bunch of church guys got together and we played football. Got together Monday morning and we met at a park and played football, and it was fun. I was used to playing what is called Turkey Bowl on Friday. American Thanksgiving is usually Thursday in November, the fourth one. And so Friday morning, we'd have these huge church tournaments, and each church would have their team and play flag football. And so I was used to doing that. And so moving up here, just having some kind of memory of that, it was great. And the lead pastor was the QB, quarterback for one team. It's the guy that throws the ball. And somehow I got picked as quarterback for the other team. Maybe because I'm American or something. I threw the ball well, but usually quarterbacks are taller, at least 6 feet tall. And those of you online who don't know me, I'm not 6 feet, 5'11". No, I'm just kidding. But so we played, and it was fun. And we played for a few hours, and then it was really great. And I'm sure you guys have your memories as well of great Thanksgivings. And many of us this time around, this year, aren't able to do the things that we usually do. Maybe football, but more likely meeting with extended family or even immediate family who we don't live with. Traveling is more difficult. It's different because of this pandemic that we're living in, COVID-19. And probably if we were to be honest, it makes giving thanks a bit more challenging, doesn't it? Because of the difficulties that we have. There's an air of discontentment in the world right now. It's obvious, it's understandable. This air of discontentment. We're discontent with a lot of things, to be honest. We're discontent with the pandemic going on for this long so far. I mean, we are in 7 months into this pandemic now. We're discontent about the shutdowns of society, right? Even our region here, we've kind of gone back a stage into stage 2 now, where indoor businesses are closed down for the time being, for the next 4 weeks. People are discontent about that. Gyms have closed down. Some of us aren't able to go to the gym anymore. A lot of different things, indoor dining, things like that. There's good discontentment about having to wear masks. I feel bad when I'm up here on stage, but, for you to sit here, those of you who are here, and to sit here with a mask for, hour and some change, especially on those hot days. We're discontent with having to wear masks. There are a lot of anti-maskers in this world, probably because they're discontent. Discontent about racial injustices. We should be, right? Racial injustices that have been going on, highlighted by all the different riots in the U.S. We're discontent about how law enforcement operates sometimes, right? Those few bad apples, as we say. We're discontent about, maybe, I can't speak for you, but candidates for the U.S. presidency. Discontent about what's going on in politics, even here in Canada. We're discontent about how the government is handling this pandemic, maybe, about how they're handling schools reopening, or allowing certain businesses to open and reopen. It's affecting some of your jobs, affecting your lives. especially if you have young kids at home. And some of you may be discontent with church, right? Maybe not directly at the church, but discontent that, online is not the same. Or even being here at church is not the same. I mean, we are doing our best, but honestly, it's not the same as before, right? It's not the same as pre-March, where we had people here and we're free to shake hands. Remember the handshaking contest that we used to have in the middle of service, where we shake everybody's hand, right? Even hugs. Air of discontentment. And it's understandable. I'm not here to judge anybody. Thanksgiving in the midst of this is an opportune time for us. It's an opportune time for us in the midst of this discontentment that we're facing. And perhaps it's painful for you to reflect on yourself, but this is such an opportunity that we have right now. We have a choice. We can just say, you know what, I'm just going to remain discontent. I'm just going to be miserable and grumble until this thing is over. That's a choice that we make. Or we can move forward. And so this message is for those who want to move forward, to help us to move forward and to really find contentment in the midst of circumstances. So we look at what the great apostle Paul says in the book of Philippians, or his letter to the Philippians. In chapter 4, we look at 4 verses 10 to 13. Philippians 4:10, starting there. And he says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Well, let's pray. Lord, I just want to thank you for what? Your immeasurable love, for your grace and mercy. We thank you that you've given us eternal life, or you've offered it to us. And Lord, as we spend a few moments looking at words of the Apostle Paul, inspired through your Spirit, we ask for wisdom, we ask for guidance, we ask for power and strength this morning. Amen. Well, to give you some background about this passage, right? It's talking about contentment here. To give you some background. The letter to the Philippians is one of 4 letters known as the prison epistles. The prison epistles. And why these letters? Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon are the 4 letters that Paul wrote while he was imprisoned. That's why they call them the prison epistles. Right? In Acts chapter 28, the end of the book of Acts, we see that Paul has finally arrived in Rome, right? At the end of Acts, the last number of chapters in Acts basically details how he was accused of starting riots and causing trouble, and he kept appealing to Caesar, and they kept transporting. He was arrested, and they kept transporting him from region to region because they would hear him in court, and they'd say, well, this is nothing. There's no basis for all these accusations against Paul. This is like the religious kind of squabble. So let them deal with it. And Paul was like, no, I appeal to Caesar. So I said, okay, fine. You want to go to Caesar? Well, and so he kept going from city to city. And finally, Paul made it to Rome, which is where he wanted to go. Eventually, he wanted to go all the way west to Spain. He arrives in Rome in Acts 28. And Caesar hears him out, but he keeps wanting to hear him, and it gets delayed, and then the new Caesar comes in. And all this time, while he is in Rome, he's arrested, so he's in prison, but he's under house arrest. So he had some freedoms. But he couldn't leave his house. They didn't have ankle monitors back then, but they had a guard guarding Paul's house to make sure that he would not leave. So the only way that Paul would be able to meet anybody is if they went over his house. And it's kind of a similar circumstance to where we are, right? We're sort of under house arrest, right? We're isolated at home. There's not, all the things that we used to be able to do. We're limited in the areas. Paul's situation is obviously worse. And so this is the scenario, the setting in which Paul writes his letter to the Philippians, as well as Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon. Now, he had been in prison before. If you read the book of Acts, he was imprisoned in the city of Philippi, where this letter to the Philippians is written to. He was there for one night. He was imprisoned in Caesarea for 2 years, here Rome for 2 years, and then later on, as other historians talk about other imprisonments. But he writes this letter while he is under house arrest. And it's interesting that despite his circumstances of being under house arrest, he talks about contentment to the church in Philippi. And so this morning we talk about four truths about contentment today. 4 truths. Number 1, contentment is enhanced by relationships. Contentment is enhanced by relationships. So in verse 10, it says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. You rejoice greatly in the Lord that the church in Philippi renewed their concern for him. They remembered him, and they showed their appreciation, their love for Paul. And Paul rejoiced greatly. There was a period of time where the church was not able to reach out to Paul for various reasons. Paul was traveling a lot. He was on his missionary journey. He was being transported while he was arrested. He hadn't heard from the Philippian church in a long time. He loved them. Most likely he founded that church, the church that existed in Philippi. So there was a great relationship there, and he hadn't heard from them. But he says that he rejoiced greatly when he heard back from them. Now, Paul is content, but what he says here is that relationships matter. Relationships are important. Contentment doesn't mean that we don't need anybody else. Okay? I mean, in some sense it's true, right? Contentment. If you're content in the Lord, you really don't need anything else. But we do, as this pandemic has showed. We need people in our lives. We need family, friends in our lives. And we got a break in the summer. Warmer days. We can hang out at the park. How many of you have done that with friends? Say, hey, let's just go to the park and sit on a bench 6 feet apart from each other and just chat, right? As the weather gets colder and colder, being outdoors becomes harder and harder. Restrictions become tighter. We got to remember this. Contentment is enhanced by relationships. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, many of us, if not all of us, were in panic mode, right? And I remember it had been months. I didn't even have the energy to reach out to friends. But I remember I got a call from a friend checking up on me. And I remember setting up a video chat with them. And I came out of that like this renewed sense of energy in me. You guys probably have similar situations, right? We don't need to spiritualize contentment by saying, I don't need anybody. I don't need anyone in my life. I have Jesus, and that's all I need. That's spiritualizing, hyper-spiritualizing life. God created us. Remember, as we looked at Genesis 1 at the beginning of the friendship series, God created us to be social creatures. God created us to be relational beings. And so, before we even get into contentment, we got to realize it's enhanced by relationships. We need people. We need one another in our lives. If you're listening to this and you're saying, well, I don't have anybody in my life. It's like, call me up. Reach out. Reach out to someone. If you have nobody that you can open up to, let me know. I can't say that I'm going to be the one to be your best friend, but I can connect you with someone else, or I can be there for you as well, and just connect one another in community. Contentment is enhanced by relationships, okay? That's kind of the beginning of it. Number two, the second truth about contentment is this. Contentment is learned. Contentment is learned. In verse 11, it says, I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. He says, I've learned to be content with whatever the circumstances. This word learn, it's a word that's related to studying. It's to gain new information or to be reminded of old information. This word is used in the previous verse, in verse 9, Philippians 4:9. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice. You know, we're a naturally pessimistic people. There are some people who are overly optimistic, okay? And sometimes they're annoying. But we're naturally pessimistic people. Something bad happens and we're just like, oh, you know, everything is bad. We tend to focus on the negatives, even those of us who are optimistic. Contentment is learned. We have to learn it. It doesn't usually just come right away. It's something that we struggle with and something that we have to learn. You remember when you first learned to ride a bike? If you know how to ride a bike? I remember my dad kind of helped me out with that. I had the training wheels on, and I was like, I'm a big boy. I don't need training wheels. It's holding me back. And so, you know, he held the back of my seat, and I was like, don't let go. But I was pedaling faster as I was going, and he was like running with me, and I was telling him not to let go. But then I was pedaling faster, and he was having a hard time catching up, you know, and I was just going faster and faster, and all of a sudden I was like, where's Dad? And he had to let go. He couldn't keep up, so he just let me go, right? But it's learned, right? Learning how to ride a bike is a learned process, you know, or playing an instrument, right? It's a learned process. You take lessons, you practice, you learn, and you grow, and you take baby steps in improving and getting better. And it's the same with character. It's the same with our character. It's the same with our spiritual lives. It must be learned. And so contentment is learned. If we find ourselves discontent, it's not just going to be like, boom, it's going to be over. It's got to be something that we put effort into. Just like riding a bike, just like learning an instrument, just like learning any sport, whatever other analogy that you can think of. Any skill is learned. Contentment is learned. So practice. How do we do that practically? Well, one thing we can do is think about the positive things in the situation that you find yourself in. Think about the positive things rather than the negative things. Right now, during this pandemic, think about the positive things. I don't know if you follow the NBA basketball, but my hometown team is the Lakers, and it's the NBA Finals right now. They're all in a bubble, this NBA bubble down in Florida. You can't go in or out, and they're in the finals, and they could have taken the championship on Friday, but they lost. I was so mad. But then I was like, you know what? On the good side, I get to watch more basketball, and hopefully they win tonight. Right? Think about the positive things. Right now in your situation where you are, there's an air of discontentment in your soul. Okay? What are the positive things that we can focus on? And if writing them down helps you, if you have a journal or something like that, you write them down, that can be done as well. My ordination supervisor told me of this experiment recently. There were three groups, okay? Three groups. There was a negative group, a neutral group, and a positive group. The negative group wrote down all the negative things that was going on in their lives. So for 15 days, these experimenters said, okay, you're the negative group, just write down all the negative things. Okay? The neutral group, he told them, just write down neutral things that don't matter. Like, I turned on the faucet today. Okay? The positive group was write down all the positive things. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know what the result of that experiment was. The negative group, after 15 days, they were kind of unhappy. They were discontent. They were complainers, complaining about everything. The neutral group, they're just like, turn on the faucet today. I made ravioli. I mean, that could be negative or positive depending on your feelings about ravioli. The positive group, they were happy. They were much happier than this negative group because of the mental practice that they were doing. And so some people call this prayer. Some people call it just talking to God. But this is how we learn, by practice, practice, practice. The words of Allen Iverson. Practice! Practice, practice, practice is a key to learning. And so we practice contentment by focusing on the positive things. So do that right now. As I continue to talk, try to focus on the things that God is doing. And sometimes the negative things in your life, God is doing to get your attention or to speak to you. The third truth about contentment is this: contentment is not based on external circumstances. Contentment is not based on external circumstances. I know, he says in verse 12, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or living in want. Paul lists some contrasting circumstances here, whether you're hungry, whether you're full, or whether he's full. He is content. He says, I know these things because of his experience, personal experience. In 2 Corinthians 11, verses 23 to 28, Paul lists some of his experiences here. It's a pretty long passage. I'm just going to read it for us. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. He outlines his personal experiences. He says, I have worked much harder, been imprisoned more frequently, been flogged more severely. If you don't know what flogging is you're being whipped by this like severe whip. It's like the flogging involved. It was a corporal punishment. You know, if you were convicted of a serious crime, you would get flogged by this leather whip that had embedded in this whip pieces of ivory, sharp pieces of glass, some rock, stone, and things like that. So it wasn't just a normal whip. It was a pretty severe whip, and they would whip you 39 times because the theory was if they whipped you 40 times, you would end up dead. So they just wanted the person to be just short of death, to be punished hard enough so that they'd be in pain but not die. Flogged. So Paul was flogged a number of times, as was Jesus before he was crucified, right? Been flogged more severely and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. That's what that is. 40 lashes minus 1. 39 times. 5 times he was flogged. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Not the kind of stone that kids do nowadays, right? Literally had stones thrown at him. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. Hey, imagine that, in the open sea for a day and a night, out in the middle of a sea. I have been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face the daily pressure of my concern for all the churches. Paul went through a lot. I mean, just read that passage if you start complaining about your life. Because this is a lot that Paul went through. Paul was a guy who suffered a lot in his life. But even though he went through a lot, he says, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. When he says, I know what it is to be in need, I know what it is to have plenty, he's not just talking. He actually knows more than most people do. He learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. And this word learned here in verse 12 is in a passive voice. It means he received this learning. Someone taught it to him. We have to be willing to learn. Some call this a life lesson. Sometimes it's a divine lesson. Probably all the time it's a divine lesson. A lesson from God through circumstances. Remember, he was under house arrest for preaching the gospel, for doing something right. He was in house arrest. You know, if we look to our life circumstances to make us happy, we're often going to find ourselves discontent. We're never going to achieve contentment because life is imperfect. Lots of bad things happen to people in life. And if our goal in life is to avoid pain, to avoid suffering, to avoid hurt, we're going to fail because life is full of pain. Life is full of suffering. As we talked about, remember the second church in the 7 churches in Revelation. Life is suffering. And so if our goal in life is to avoid that, we're never going to achieve it. If we want to be happy and content in life, we have to look past our circumstances. We have to look past the outward, external conditions. And for us today, living in this COVID pandemic, if we want to be happy, if we want to go through it happy and content, then we have to look above, rise above this pandemic, which some of you have in speaking with you. I'm encouraged when I speak with some of you because you're rising above it. It means that we can't just wait around for COVID to be over, put our life on pause until this pandemic is over. Because we're not going to be happy. We're not going to be content. But it's a choice that we have. And a choice that is before us. There's always a choice before us. Just want to get through it? Or are we wanting to move forward in the midst of it? Which leads us to the final point. First, contentment is enhanced by relationships. Second, contentment is learned. Third, contentment is not based on external circumstances. And four, contentment comes from Christ. Contentment comes from Christ. Those of us who have been around church already know this verse, have heard it many times. Even those of us who are not familiar with church probably have seen this verse somewhere at like a game, a sports game or something. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. I can do all this. Actually, I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. Have you heard that before? This verse is used to support a lot of things. Like sports, like I mentioned. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can win this game, this battle, this match, whatever you want to call it, through Christ who strengthens me. Or other activities that we have. I can do this through Christ who strengthens me. I can ace this exam through Christ who strengthens me. Maybe there, if you're single, if you're young, and you're nervous about asking someone out, you're like, I can ask this girl out through Christ who strengthens me. Okay. And, in some ways, Christ will strengthen us. But this verse is beyond that, actually. This verse is talking about contentment. When Paul is saying, I can do all this through Christ, or through him who strengthens me, which is implied that is Christ, he's saying, I can be content in any and every situation through Christ who strengthens me. All things refers to all circumstances. Because it is difficult for us, by sheer willpower, to find contentment. It's through Christ who strengthens us, all things. The ability to be satisfied during this pandemic, to be content, to be happy, comes from Christ, who has unlimited strength. He has unlimited strength. And he is the one that gives it to us so that we can rise above and find contentment. I've mentioned the gym before a lot. I really miss it. I was, believe it or not, I used to go a lot. And I was really focused on the bench press. That's kind of the main exercise if you lift weights. And so I was really focused on that at one point. And I had this goal of hitting 275 pounds. If I could bench press 275 pounds twice, that's your max, whatever you can do twice. I was like, I'll be happy. I had friends who, I had this one friend who was my size, but bigger. and he benched like 365, and I was like, that's too much for me. I can't do that. But 275, I can do it. And so I got to this point of 265. It's like 10 pounds short of my goal. And I didn't get to that goal, but I remember I would go to the gym, and that'd be the first exercise that I do when I'm working on chest. And I would get in the gym, and usually I work out alone. I just want to go in, do my workout, and then leave. And I'd get in, and I'd stretch and do all this stuff, and then get on the bench and lie down. And you start off low, you kind of warm up, and then you rise a bit, you put more weights on, and then you hit your max. And I remember being like, okay, you have the weight above here, and you're like, okay, I can do this. You take some breaths, and you bring it down, and then you push. And I was like, I can't do it. And imagine that, you're in this, you have this bar on top of you, and you're stuck. And usually, if you're smart, or if you go with a friend, you have what's called a spotter, someone who is helping you here. Well, I didn't have a spotter. I was like, people are busy. I didn't ask for a spotter. And so I was stuck. So I said, I can lift this weight through Christ who strengthens me. And I couldn't do it. So I'm asking someone, hey, I didn't want to yell in the whole gym, like, hey, somebody help me. Like, how embarrassing is that, right? That would be embarrassing for me. And so I was just like, somebody help me out here. My chest is hurting. And someone came and they spotted me and helped me up. But the spotter is the person who comes and they don't pull it up for you. But a person who makes sure that you're lifting the weight, and they give you a little bit of help. If you're a good spotter, you put 2 fingers on the thing, and you just kind of guide them. But it's a mental kind of thing, but you guide them. And that's kind of what Christ is to us in life. He's the one that provides us the strength, but we are the ones who do it as well. We are the ones who actually pursue contentment. He's the one that gives us that ability to do so when we strive for it. We relying on Christ's strength. In the same 2 Corinthians in chapter 1, verse 9, or verse 8, it says, we do not want you to be informed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experience in the province of Asia. We're under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we have received the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. Not that we would rely on ourselves. This all madness happened. Not that we would rely on ourselves, our own strength, our own ability, our own will, power, but on God. And then he adds, who raised us from the dead, or who raises the dead. People can overlook that, but that little phrase is important, who raises the dead. Because God, the one that we rely on, is the one that has the ability to raise the dead. A power and an ability that no other person, no other creature on this earth has. Nobody can raise the dead except for God. And that is one, he is the one whom we rely on. So contentment comes from Christ. And only when we have contentment are we able to give thanks to God for the things in our lives. It's hard to believe it's Thanksgiving in many ways. It doesn't feel like it, right? Let's not waste this opportunity this weekend, including tomorrow. Let's find contentment. Let's not just drudge through this time, but let's move through it victoriously with contentment, happiness, satisfaction in Christ. Now, I understand the sentiment. Maybe you're sitting here, I don't have much to be thankful for this year. I lost my job, having issues with my family members. I've lost a lot of friends. Can't do the things that I used to love doing. We can focus on that, and I understand some of that sentiment. God understands too. But I encourage us, don't stay there. It's no good for us. It is not good for us to stay there. Let's rise above. Practice, right? Contentment is learned. If we review the 4 points, number 1, contentment is enhanced by relationships. Reach out to somebody. Number 2, contentment is learned. Write down the positive things. Don't write down the negative things. Contentment is not based on external circumstances. Let's not dwell on the circumstances. Contentment comes from Christ's strength, or from Christ. Let's rely upon Him. So as we close with this song, can we reflect on that this morning? Can we reflect on contentment, where we are? Let's pray.